What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We've got WBC Junior Middleweight 154-pound champ Jermell Charlo, 33-1, taking on WBA and IBF champ Jeison Rosario, 21-1 with one draw. This is his first title defense in a title unification match where the winner will be leaving the ring with 3 out of the division's 4 major titles. Now, just a few years ago, Jermell Charlo was just one of 2 Charlo brothers at 154, and I thought that twin brother Jermall was the better, more complete fighter of the 2. Jermall earned a major title in 2015, 1 year before Jermell did. Jermall defended that IBF belt successfully 3 times, including a win versus Austin Trout and a knockout of Julian Williams before going up to 160, where he's fought 6 times versus less than stellar competition, but will surely have his mettle tested versus Sergiy Derevyanchenko on the same day as this Jermell Charlo versus Jeison Rosario fight. 2 full fight cards, 1 evening. Interesting play by Al Heyman and PBC. And 1 risky pay-per-view proposition, given the Charlo's lack of crossover star power and mainstream recognition outside of hardcore boxing circles. Now, Jermell Charlo has since captured a title at 154, lost it, and then won it back. The more I've watched the twin Charlos fight over the years, the more I've identified their styles, similarities, and differences. Jermell Charlo, still at 154, is a vicious finisher. I mean, they both are. But Jermell Charlo's actually more knockout reliant than Jermall is. Jermall is more of a well-rounded round winner than Jermell, where Jermall's winning not only the high-octane explosive rounds, but also the slow rounds with more technical boxing and less activity. A few years ago, I tuned in and watched Jermell Charlo get outboxed pretty decisively by John Jackson, son of hard-hitting former champ Julian Jackson, before Charlo scored a pretty bizarre knockout. John Jackson went out to a pretty commanding lead in the fight, going into the 7th and then the 8th, and then he suddenly gestures to the ref that something happened to his eye, as if he was calling for a foul. So Jackson stops fighting momentarily, turns his back to Jermell, and Jermell immediately launches a few punches that knock Jackson out cold, body hanging on the ropes, halfway falling out of the ring. And as online boxing analyst and attorney Richard Dwyer, look him up on YouTube, Richard Dwyer Boxing, he says knockouts cause amnesia. Basically, people forget all of the different things that they witnessed throughout the fight once the dramatic knockout occurs. But Jermell Charlo was having a lot of difficulty with John Jackson. John Jackson, by the way, is now in jail facing a 15-year minimum sentence for allegedly raping a 15-year-old and producing child pornography. Just awful, awful stuff. So Jermell Charlo versus John Jackson was for the vacant WBC 154-pound title, the same title Charlo would eventually lose and win back versus another skilled technician, Tony Harrison. Now, Jermell's also had some good fights where he was an effective round winner. He had a close decision win versus former title challenger Vanes Martirosyan back in 2015. That was a big win for Charlo. Martirosyan had been a major factor at 154 from 2009 all the way up to his 2016 failed title attempt versus Erislandy Lara, one of the division's top 3 of the past decade. You know what? Let me not speak too soon on that one because Jermell's still at 154. Canelo spent a good amount of time at 154. There have been some good 154 fighters. I just have a tough time finding 3 that were better over the past decade than Erislandy Lara. I don't think you could put Jarrett Hurd above him, although Jarrett Hurd beat an older Lara. Hurd then lost to Julian Williams. It's a fluid situation, but I feel pretty good about placing Erislandy Lara in the top 3 at 154 over the past 10 years. Longtime title holder. But yeah, Vanes Martirosyan competed against the who's who. In fact, he fought Erislandy Lara to a draw 4 years before that. Martirosyan's only loss before Charlo was to Demetrius Andrade in a split decision for the vacant WBO 154 title. Demetrius Andrade today holds the WBO title up at 160. But Jermell Charlo versus Martirosyan was very close, and Martirosyan since had a couple of those tough decision losses in his career. You know, those 50-50 fights where 3 judges could basically determine the trajectories of 2 careers. I don't know if the loss versus Charlo would qualify as one of the more disputed losses, but Charlo was in there versus a very experienced vet and came out on top. Charlo then defends that WBC belt successfully 4 times. The last 2 of those were a shocking first round, one-punch knockout against then undefeated, fast-rising prospect Erickson Lubin. Unbelievable. And a decision win versus Austin Trout, high-level veteran, a former lesser belt holder and major title contender. Charlo beats Trout via unanimous decision. Twin brother Jermall also decisioned Trout 2 years prior. So it's not all feast or famine for Jermell Charlo. He's now earned decision wins over multiple top opponents. He's decisioned Gabriel Rosado as well. It just so happens that Jermell Charlo is just as likely to score a thunderous, electrifying knockout. But the types of fights that he's had the biggest struggles in have been versus slick opponents who practice the sweet science of movement, timing, jabbing, precision punching, elusive defense. But boy, if you've been wanting to see Jermell Charlo in a firefight instead of some of the chess matches that we've seen him in, you've got one right here. And you've got an opponent who will also be there to get hit. Now, Jeison Rosario has improved since his only loss 3.5 years ago to Nathaniel Gallimore in Rosario's first fight in the U.S. Every professional fight that he'd had up until that point was in the DR, the Dominican Republic. He loses via 6-round TKO in a fight where he'd had Gallimore rocked a few times. Action-packed fight. Once Gallimore continued his commitment to the body towards the middle rounds and started breaking off with some intelligent, hard combinations, Rosario got badly dropped, with a 2-second delay between the punch and Rosario collapsing. Strange delay. He got up, but his legs never recovered. He got dropped a couple more times. Referee Jay Nady stops the fight. Since then, Rosario's gone 6-0 with 1 draw. 3 of the wins via knockout, including his title-winning upset over Julian J-Rock Williams, who had just earned his belt with an upset win over Jarrett Hurd, who was viewed as one of the 2 best in the division, along with Jermell Charlo, especially after Hurd beat Lara in a great fight. So Jermell Charlo versus Jarrett Hurd was kind of the budding potential super fight, which was ruined first by Charlo losing that decision to Tony Harrison, then with Jarrett Hurd losing to Julian J-Rock Williams. Besides that upset title win versus J-Rock, the biggest growth I'd seen from Rosario was him fighting a draw versus Mark Anthony Hernandez in 2018, then knocking Hernandez out in the 9th round of their rematch just 1 year later, but 4 fights later. Rosario had a very busy 2018. So Rosario's approach is generally that of a stalker, looking for his chances to launch 1 or 2 big power punches at a time. He's got a thudding but slow and inconsistent jab. It's a potentially good one, I just don't think he uses it enough. He's got a rocket of a right hand, and he loves throwing that bomb. He also likes ripping powerful left hooks to the body, although he finished Hernandez off with the left hook up top. The problem versus Charlo is that Rosario will be in there with someone who's a better defender, has equal or greater punching power, faster hands, and can frame his power punches in a more deceptive way. He's more advanced at setting up the power punches. And Charlo's had to do this time and time again versus guys who are pretty good at not getting hit flush, like Tony Harrison. Now let's be clear, that rematch versus Harrison that Charlo won was a fight that he was losing more rounds than winning, but had scored a 2nd round knockdown. Watching the fight, the broadcasters and official judge pretty much agreed that Charlo was losing. So he still hasn't totally answered for his vulnerabilities versus slick boxers, but to his credit, he worked through that fight, kept the pressure on Harrison, who for some reason obliged Charlo in fighting a close-range phone booth style fight. Rewatch that and look at how confident and dare I say overconfident Harrison appears in that second half of the fight. But as long as there's time on the clock, Jermell Charlo is always 1 or 2 punches away from changing or finishing the fight. You've really got to be on for all 12 rounds. Both Charlos, in fact, have shown that type of heart when the boxing chess match isn't going their way. Jermall Charlo at 160, most notably against Matt Korobov when there was a stylistic challenge, to say the least, for Jermall Charlo. He gutted it, worked through it, ended up winning a few of the later rounds, especially the 12th round, and ended up pulling out a disputed decision victory. I thought Korobov won, but Charlo really fought a tough fight given the problems he was having in the early rounds. But Jermell Charlo shouldn't have any of those chess match issues versus a style like Rosario's. Yes, he'll have some bombs lobbed his way, but Rosario will also be there to get hit, as I mentioned earlier. And if you're asking me who I'm taking as the shootout commences, I think Charlo is going to blast Rosario with something remarkable, perhaps even a highlight reel type of KO. See, Rosario often likes to lead. Well, guess what? Charlo loves to counter. I'm kind of having visions of Canelo Alvarez versus James Kirkland for those who remember Kirkland's aggressive over pursuit and how Canelo neutralized and then destroyed Kirkland, catching him with beautiful counter combinations and knocking Kirkland out cold. And I'm not suggesting that Rosario will empty the clip as obviously as Kirkland did and as early as he did. Man, James Kirkland with and without trainer and Wolf is night and day from a strategic standpoint. But when the temperature of this fight goes up, I think that Rosario will do what he's instinctively inclined to do, and that's to get on his front foot and get heavier on offense and increasingly negligent defensively. So I've got Jermell Charlo by KO, TKO here. I'd be very surprised, given both of these guys' punching power, Rosario's reliance on throwing bombs, and Charlo's precise counterpunching, if this one goes the distance. I just don't see it. And if it does go the distance, it'll do wonders for Rosario's stock, but I don't think it's likely. And sure, when you hit like Rosario, you've got a puncher's chance at scoring a knockout as well, but I have yet to see anyone bully the bully that is Jermell Charlo. In fact, I haven't seen either Charlo brother get muscled and beaten up by someone bringing the pain to them. Again, they've only had their real moments of struggle versus crafty technicians, not power punching tough guys. Also, from a psychological standpoint, Rosario is still only a few US fights into his career and is won on the biggest stage he was on versus J. Rock Williams. I've heard him say that he wants to prove that he's on the same level as Jermell Charlo. I firmly believe that Jermell Charlo believes that he's the baddest man at 154. Rosario still sounds like a guest who's happy to be invited to the big boys table. I wonder if at some point when he senses danger, if he'll become the beta in the ring and concede to Charlo's more developed skill set. Rosario's still very young, only 25, so this could come down to whether he ends up taking the type of beating that will impact his career down the line. The good news, I guess, is that when Charlo has you hurt, he'll have you out of there in no time. So you don't have to stick around and take gradual punishment over several rounds. I've now seen Jermell Charlo be very selective in throwing punches. I've seen him have to outbox good fighters and win via convincing decision. And now I've seen him have to rally back versus multiple good fighters. I don't think Rosario's ready for all this. But let me know your thoughts. 6 months from now, who do you think will be the king of the 154-pound division? How about 1 year from now? By the way, you can now take rising prospect Jaime Munguia's name out of the mix, as he's now moving up to middleweight 160. That was only a matter of time, wasn't it? Big dude. So who do you see winning Jermell Charlo versus Jeison Rosario? Who do you see winning between fellow 154-pounders Erickson Lubin and Terrell Goucher? Leave your comments in the comments, and please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.